I am so excited for who we have coming up next. It is my honor to welcome Anita Nowak, who I have had the pleasure of working with Anita before on another summit. So I'm so excited to have her back. She's a faculty member of the McGill Executive Institute. She has done multiple TEDx stages. She's a podcaster and author of Purposeful Empathy, tapping into our hidden superpowers for personal, organizational, and social change. Today, she's going to talk about empathetic listening for inner development and outer impact. Anita, I'm so excited to give you the stage.
Thank you, Kara, and thanks to seeing so many familiar faces that have stayed committed to this movement for so long. It's wonderful, wonderful. So yes, thank you for that very generous and warm introduction. I've got some slides that I'm going to share as well. So let me just take us there. Yeah, so I thought we would dive into why empathic listening and empathy circles are so important to the inner development that's needed for the outer impact that the world needs, and that I would share some of my learning as I've gone on my journey to bring empathy circles into the workplace where leaders can deploy empathic listening more carefully. So I discovered a couple of years ago the inner development goals. If you haven't been onto their website, I really encourage everyone to do a Google search. I was at their conference 2 years ago, and I was really caught by Bayo's statement, "The times are urgent. Let's slow down." It sounds like a paradox, but when you lean into the IDG framework, you realize that that's exactly what we need. So I want to frame my talk with a model at the beginning and a framework at the end to provide context. So we've probably all heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals that were launched in 2015. We had a 15-year runway with them, and it's really to help kind of lift people out of global poverty, help mitigate against climate change, gender equality, all the things that keep us up at night. And the idea was that the world would sign on to these SDGs, and that by 2030, we would see some major progress. Sadly, it's 2024. We have 6 years to go, and we've only achieved 12% of the goals. So a group in Stockholm actually got together and said, what do we need from leaders in order to achieve those goals? And through quite a process, bringing some thought leaders around systems change together, they launched the Inner Development Goals. And so I just came back from their third annual conference, and you can see that empathy and compassion are very important goals, or very important skills. These are a set of 23 skills that leaders should be developing in order to be the kind of leaders that we need to, address some of the problems that face the world. So the SDGs are the external challenges, and the IDGs are inner capabilities, right? So when I think about leaders in the workplace, it's quite fascinating to me that 84% of CEOs understand how important empathy is, including to their bottom line, but 7 out of 10 fear showing empathy in the workplace because they're worried they're going to be less respected if they do it. But, somebody like Satya Nadella, who runs Microsoft, said it's not a soft skill. Empathy is the hardest skill we'll ever learn. And I think that the empathy practice, empathic listening and the empathy circles, is a practice to develop that skill. Now, when we are feeling emotionally connected to someone, our brain lights up the pleasure and reward centers of our brain. It feels good to our body. We all know that feeling. But when we're feeling empathy fatigue, guess what happens? Our brain cannot be in a state of empathy. We cannot extend empathy when we're feeling overwhelmed or stressed ourselves. So usually when I talk about empathic leadership and how to deploy empathy in the workplace, I'll use a little example. So this guy's yelling at, let's say, this woman in the white blouse with the bun, and she leaves the meeting and she's feeling terrible about herself. And then she gets a knock on the door at her office saying, "Hey, Helen, do you have a minute?" And she's stressed out herself, having been through some kind of really terrible meeting. And now she's expected to show up with empathy. How can she do that, right? So I usually talk about a 6-step process, and then I'm going to go deep into one and end with why empathy circles are so powerful to develop that particular step. So I say usually Helen goes back to her office, she gets the knock on the door, and she's expected to show up with empathy, but she's stressed out herself. So the first step is to know that she's stressed, right? To just pay attention to what her body is saying. Maybe her cheeks are flushed. Maybe she's feeling butterflies in her stomach. Maybe her heart rate is racing. So to have some self-awareness that she's feeling stressed out in the first place. In order for step 2 to happen, which would be self-regulation, how do you take that high level of stress down a few notches? How do you flip into the parasympathetic nerve system? And that's through maybe perhaps some breathing exercises. You could do some box breathing. Nobody needs to know it, but just to sort of take down your level of stress. The third step I call bridge crossing, which is really a simple step of making the decision to leave your frame of reference and to meet somebody where they're at. So let's say the person knocks on the door and says, Helen, do you have a minute? And that person is Peter. And he's like, I need to take some time off because we're moving my mom into a elder care home because she has early stage dementia. And I need to take a couple of days off. It's the worst possible timing. I know we have this major client deliverable, but Helen's deciding to cross the bridge and not freak out about what's going to happen with her team, but to show up for Peter. In that moment, she needs to do some cognitive empathy, some perspective taking, some active listening. And this is where the empathy circle process helps us. So I'm going to come back to this slide in a minute. The fifth step is to take the empathic action once Helen's heard from Peter. This is not the moment to say, hey, let's take out our agenda and let's reconfigure the workflow. This is the moment to really extend empathy to Peter and say, how are you going to take care of yourself? Sounds like you're going through a lot. When you're ready, come back and see me and let's talk about the workflow. That empathic action will go a long way to increasing engagement. And then the sixth step, which a lot of leaders forget, is the self-empathy. You know, Helen had a tough meeting, then she's had this tough conversation, and then usually she'll go back to her emails when in fact she might want to take a beat and take care of herself in important ways. So as I said, I want to focus on the fourth step because that's, I think, where rubber hits the road. Empathy circles are so important to develop the skill of sitting with someone and allowing them to share and to provide. So I usually call them the 2 golden rules of perspective taking in a scenario like this. One is to really hold space and allow silence, to be more comfortable, not to be allergic to silence. The second thing is the skill of repeating back some of what you just heard, because when somebody is speaking and hears back the words that they've just spoken, they really feel heard. So I think, if we're going to be a leader that's extending empathy in our workplace, the capacity that we build through empathy circling is really, really, really important. So why does empathy circles matter so much? Well, precisely, our brains have been formulated, have been designed to listen, to respond, right? When we hear somebody talking to us, we're quick to respond, and especially if our emotions are triggered. But we really need to learn how to listen, to understand. And that's why I think empathy circles as a practice is so important. I remember in the beginning training, I remember thinking, what a cognitive weight. It was so hard to spend an hour and a half listening to understand and reflect back. It takes a lot of work to do. And then with practice, you get better at it. And I said that I would bookend the talk with a framework. So I want to end with 2 final slides. I think empathy really is really important for the world. We know Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and that he said self-actualization is the most important thing that we'll achieve as an individual. But in fact, he also said that self-transcendence is more important than self-actualization. And I think empathy and empathizing with others is a road to self-transcendence. Thank you.